Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Trident Talks. My name is Charlie Ryman, Director of Recruitment here at Trident Search, and I'm delighted to welcome Glen Hymers, who's the Global CISO at Save the Children. Glen, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking the time.
No worries. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation given your specific situation. For those people who don't know you and what you're currently doing, would you like to give a brief introduction?
As Charlie said, Glen Hymers, I'm the Global Chief Information Security Officer and Head of Data Protection for Save the Children International, which is the humanitarian international arm of the NGO. We do the humanitarian relief work and the crisis response. So what most people would traditionally see from a Save the Children aspect of life. So that's what I do. That's my day job. And then my part-time job, which I don't think you'd ever refer to it as a part-time job, is I'm a part-time volunteer reservist these days with the Royal Air Force. As a Royal Air Force, I'm a commissioned officer in the Royal Air Force Police. Took my commission 2019, end of 2019. Before that, I was a senior NCO, so I've risen up through the ranks to get to that point. Prior to that, lots of stints in commercial, couple of stints in commercials, and working for organisations like Fujitsu Defence and National Security. But before that, I was a regular member of the regular service. I was a member of the RAF Police for 12 and a bit years before being made redundant in 2012 as part of the option, the SDR. I was going to say option for change then. That's aging myself a bit, isn't it? Part of the SDSR of that year.
Okay. Very impressive. And you can tell you've got a military background due to that impressive shelving unit behind you. I'm pretty sure you've just whacked that up recently after the recent...
Yeah, definitely gone up. It's all about COVID and making yourself look intelligent. Now, I've read every single one of them, bar 2 books. I think I've read every single book that's on that bookshelf.
It's impressive.
I'm a bookworm. I like to read.
You've got one up on me. So what's it like then being a global CISO for a non-for-profit organisation and balancing your reservist commitment?
Busy is the easy answer to that. So I run IT security for a global, truly global. When I say global, I mean truly global. We're in something like 52 countries across the world with major offices, and then we're in pretty much everywhere that you could ever think of that doesn't have it. Anywhere that we put a tent up, so Syria, for example, or somewhere like that, we're in those regions and we're doing that work. And I'm responsible for making sure that 17,000 people are secure in the IT space. I mean, thankfully, not all of those are drivers. And we have, I think it's some 14,500 endpoint type situation that I'm responsible for. And then our network to make sure that we're all secure on that front. So yeah, it's quite busy. And then factor in the reserves aspect. I mean, I'm luckily, in as much as I'm on a nationally recruiting unit. So we only parade once a month, but that's neither here nor there when it comes to doing the job. You've got SJARs, OJARs, all of that good stuff that you've got to write and maintain, and especially during COVID, it's been quite difficult to maintain that. What does that look like, and that balance between the two? I mean, this is my office. I'm sitting in my office right now, and I'm in this thing from 8 in the morning till 5 at night. Then I'll come back up here and I'll do either reservist stuff, and then the other thing that I'm involved with in what little spare time I've got on top of that is I volunteer with the Air Training Corps. So I'm a uniformed member of staff as a service instructor with the ATC, which is the RAF Air Cadets, effectively. So yeah, I run a squadron. Took over command of a squadron. I think the old adage there is those that can make time, and I think that's pretty much it. Really, it's balancing all of these spinning plates and keeping them all going at the same time. What's the phrase? Devil makes work for idle hands, and I generally try not to be idle. I think as I've gone on, I find that the more I'm idle, the more bored I am, and the more I want to do stuff. So try and cram as much in as possible.
Well, it's a really good attitude to have. I don't know how you manage it yourself. So those people that are watching this thinking, oh, I've just got too much on at the minute, then take a look at yourself and listen to this video. So obviously with endpoints all over the world, what would you say, because you've worked for some good organizations in the past, what would you say is the biggest challenge right now? How does the security function operate with a global team?
Yeah, so with a global team, I'd like to say I had one of those. My team's really small. I've got like 3 people at the minute. We are going through a massive recruitment drive, and we're picking up bits and pieces and some posts across the world with projects that we're doing. But how do we do it? I think it's through the grace. I mean, luckily, all of my individuals are spread across the world. So I've got one individual in Latin America and the Caribbean. I've got one in Europe, and I've got one in Kenya. And I'm meant to have one in the Philippines, so they cover off the Asia region. But we've had a mayor recruiting for that. So luckily, I've got people that are in those areas, so we can monitor those areas quite nicely. But the big thing that we need to rely on, more often or not, is automation. We've got 14,500 endpoints. We can't physically monitor all of that. But the biggest balancing act that I've got is trying to spend my money properly and in the most cost efficient way possible. I mean, we're lucky as a massive NGO that we get quite good discounts with quite decent providers. So, for example, we're looking at what Microsoft can offer to us in that IT security space, because we've gone cloud first. Everything is in the cloud for us. We don't have anything left on premise as international. All of our critical apps are in cloud, etc. And so my focus is changing now from what would be the normal traditional viewpoint on life of fortress, citadel, moat, drawbridge, that kind of environment, to it being in someone else's data center, which is effectively what the cloud is, as we all know. But the questions there is how do I maintain that security with an environment that I don't necessarily, I don't own, I don't control, and how do we maintain that? So I'm starting to look more at the automation piece, things like CASB, so CASB, SASE, firewalls as a service, all of that stuff, to try and look at how we can make our works and our technology stack more streamlined and a lot more efficient and a lot quicker. And then the other thing is making sure that everybody in the organization is doing the basics, make sure the basics are right, because from the basics come good housekeeping. And if you've got the good housekeeping, then it makes life easier. Things are always going to go wrong. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. We all know that. And if an organization like Mandiant FireEye can fall foul of things like solar winds, what hope do we all have? But what we do have is having a risk targeted approach to try and make sure that we're addressing those greater risks that we see to us as an organization and moving that on. And it is that fine balancing act between cost versus time and what can make my team more efficient. And yeah, so I mean, we were lucky in as much as when COVID happened, not much has really changed for us, because as a diffused organization as we are, I mean, we can open up an office in 10 minutes, in as much as someone will rock up, pitch up a tent, attach the generators, do all of that, pretty much like you used to do in the military, turn that all around, and then you've got an office that wasn't there before. So it's how do you secure that? How do you environment that? But the advantage of having that model is that when we sent everybody home, we were set up for that already. The biggest issues that we're starting to find now, as time's gone on, is things like bandwidth in places that we operate. So, for example, we've got a big office in Kenya, which is fine when they're all in the office in Kenya. But then when they've been sent home and they may be living in a rural village with really, really rubbish broadband and bandwidth, how do they then function? So it's been more about that than it has been around the security space for us.
Yeah, so interesting. You touched on a few points there, how important now automation is to save those people hours within the environment, to make it a lot easier, because 3 or 4 people covering 14,500 endpoints, you're right, that's not going to be possible without any kind of automation. So for those organizations that haven't got on board with that yet, they really need to. It will save them money in the long term, I'm sure. And then also the difference from coming from like a fortress type environment to the cloud. What would you say the main difference is there?
It's understanding that is not your infrastructure anymore. That's the biggest thing. Because what you find is, I was in an interesting conversation about this recently, actually, where everybody's architecture has changed, but the architects haven't. So the architects are still living in the citadel, fortress, firewall, drawbridge, moat type world. What they're not then doing is, when they're looking to move out of that environment, is taking a new mindset and understanding what that looks like in the cloud. I mean, you can still do that approach in the cloud, but the problem is whether your provider in the cloud allows you to do very similar things, or what is it you're looking to do? Are you looking to secure access to that from your endpoint to there? There you need something like your cloud application security broker, so your CASB type of stuff. Are they allowed to use that app? Is it an authorized app, etc.? And then the same thing with the SASE. So security as a software edge. How do you look to do that? What does that look like? And CASB's been around a while now, but SASE as a term and as a thought process is a very infantile process at the moment. So it's something to keep an eye on, but it's definitely changing that mindset in the architect's head around the risks, because the risks are different. The risks are different because when you've got it in your fortress, it's your real estate, it's your infrastructure. When it's in the cloud, you might not necessarily make any change to it, but your cloud provider might make a change to their infrastructure, which then causes you to have a risk that you didn't know about. So it's doing that risk scanning, the risk horizon, and the architecture piece to understand that's what it looks like, as opposed to just going, oh, it's exactly the same as it was when we were on premise.
Sure. And does that take stress out of your role, knowing that the cloud provider are managing that infrastructure at all? No. Does it make it any easier?
Make any difference? And the reason it doesn't make any difference is because there are still risks, but predominantly there are risks. I'm just going to quote Donald Rumsfeld. There are things you know, there are things you don't know, and there are things you know you don't know. And to paraphrase that well-known quote, but we do know stuff, but there's also stuff we know we don't know. I don't know what's happening in the infrastructure. If say, for example, I've got an AWS bucket, other platforms are available, obviously, and AWS make a change. If they don't tell me, what do I do about that? And let's use Blackboard as an example. So for those of you that are familiar with the Blackboard breach, Blackboard as an organization has been around for a very long time. And Blackboard as an organization ticked all the boxes. They had their ISO 27001 certificates. They had their SOC 2 reports. They had all of these artifacts to go, hey, look at us, we're really secure. Yet someone somewhere set something up incorrectly, which allowed someone to gain access to elevation of rights or whatever it is, however they got in there, to get to that backup, to encrypt that backup, and then ransomware it. But this is an organization that's secure.
I think you raise a really good point there. I think we've seen it in the news recently. It's constantly in the news now, actually, about organizations being hacked or providers being hacked. I truly believe if you are targeted by like a nation state threat actor or a good APT group, there's not too much you can do about it, in all honesty. You can have your initial defenses. It's about how you respond to that. So if you're not being attacked by that APT group, it's about user behavior and education within your environment, right? They're two main things. So moving on to the fact that you have to spend time away from this organization within the reserves. How do you make sure that your environment stays secure? I can imagine you have to put a certain amount of trust within your team, and those foundations need to be in place, right?
Yeah. So how do I maintain that network is empowerment. So the military does some very good things. One of those things is it teaches us all is mission command. And the mission command principle is something very often misaligned in the military. Everybody goes, oh, this is rubbish, no one does it, rare. But if you then take those principles that we are all taught and are drummed into us and are honed into us, and take those out onto Civistry, that whole empowerment, that whole leading, not managing, it's all about leading. It's all about empowering your team. It's something that works really, really well. My team, they know what the end state is. They know what my intent is. They know what I want to deliver. And then I will just say to them, on you go. And they're really empowered by that. So, for example, I disappeared out of the organization at summer last year. I was mobilized in March to go do COVID-19 under Op Rescript. And I basically just went to the IT ops director at my place and went, there you go, there's my team. Can you look after them while I'm gone? And he was like, yeah. Because he'd been running them prior to my arrival in the year before, because there was a gap between my predecessor and me. And he went, yeah, I can run them. I've done it before. That's fine. But then the comments I was getting back with your team are brilliant, because they don't need any management. They just get on and they just do. And that's because I've gone to them and I've allowed them that flexibility and that presence of thought to go out and deal with stuff without massively having to come back to me. If they need to come back to me for advice, guidance, or they need to escalate, they know exactly where I am. But in the first instance, they're empowered to make decisions based upon what they see. If it's something that they think is going to be much more critical and is going to affect the wider organization rather than a small project, then they'll come back to me and say, right, we've got this issue. What's your thought process on it? and then we'll talk it through, and I'll give a decision. But in the first instance, they are that first line of defense. That's what they're there for. And I treat them like that. You're assigned. So, for example, my team have split into pillars. I've got individuals who are responsible for doing certain things: risk management, business continuity, disaster recovery, forensics, all of those kind of stuff. And I've got an SME in each one of those areas. And my SME, I respect them enough that I will say, well, you're the subject matter expert in that space. I mean, I know I am. That's why I'm the global CISO, but that's not the point. They're the one that's at the coalface. They're the ones working with the teams and working with the projects and working with the wider organization to do those roles. So they understand what I want, they understand what the business wants, and they understand what that fine line in the middle is. And by letting them do that, they get on with it. And it makes my life a lot easier. I'd like to say I've got an easy life. I haven't, because I've obviously got all the other strategy stuff that you've got to do, and the horizon scanning and the risk appetite piece and all that kind of stuff, and got lots of key stakeholders at the high level in the business to keep happy. But actual day-to-day work, they just get on with it, and unless they have a problem, they come back and find me. It's brilliant. It's really good.
Sounds really good. I think it's been really great to get an insight into the organization and how it works. So some key things to take away would be: automate your environment, make it easy for yourself, save money. You don't need the biggest budget in the world. Have trust in your team. So a team of 3 or 4 people can manage 14,500 endpoints, when you can establish an office within 10 minutes and then bring it back down in 10 minutes all over the world. And then just lead by example. And I think that's a really solid recipe, and that will allow you to step away for 6 months and keep that whole environment secure. So I think anyone watching this should definitely adhere to that and take some advice out of your book. So I think if you were someone coming into the industry now, or even a new CISO, what advice would you give to them?
Understand your landscape. Understand what it is that you're walking into, especially as a CISO. Take the time to get to know the organization, take the time to get to know the business. Take the time to understand your key stakeholders and what their messages are and what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. Because as a new CISO, or even an old-handed CISO, it doesn't matter, to be honest. If you go into an organization and you start stamping your size 10s all over it, all you're going to do is alienate people. It's about working collaboratively. CISOs are there to bring the stakeholders together and have those conversations. If you're at the lower level, so the analysts or your IT security officers, the same principle kind of applies. It's understand the infrastructure, understand what's required of you, what is your job. If you don't know what your role is, someone's not telling you the right things. If you think your role is just to come in and sit there and monitor Splunk all day, then guess what? That's not right, because I have an expectation that my IT security analysts are out there looking at not only the Splunk, but looking at everything else that's happening around them, the risk management pieces and all that kind of stuff. It's all about developing your awareness of what you're there to do. And only by developing that awareness will you understand the business properly. Because IT is often a silo that's seen as the whole of no, or the office of no. You can't do that because of this. You can't do that because of that. It shouldn't be that. It should be, well, actually, you can't do that because of this. But if you did this, that would work. It's all about that rather than the whole of no.
Yeah, it's solid advice. Definitely get used to understand your environment and understand your roles, but then understand everyone else's roles and understand what it is they do. I can relate to that. Back in submarines, you had your individual role, but you had to know every single valve on the submarine, what it all did, what everyone else does. So if that person fell ill or something else happened, you'd be able to assume their responsibilities, and then everyone is kept safe. So I think that's a really good analogy to use also. So finally then, if you weren't from the military and you weren't global CISO, what do you think you'd be doing?
Probably a lawyer, annoyingly. So yeah, I was at uni before I joined the RAF. I was at university and I was studying law, and then I ran out of money because I realized that, you know what, it's not cheap. And being of an era where I was the guinea pig for everything. So I was the guinea pig for the key stages when it came out. I was the guinea pig for the new GCSEs. I managed to stay on the old A-level scheme, but then when I went to university, it was like, aha, we don't do grants anymore. You can't have a grant. You've got to go to university after your scheme. And I was like, oh, winner. Yeah, I mean, the intention for me was always to join the service. So I was going to join the service as a legal officer. But then I ran out of money. I didn't have a GCSE in maths, so I couldn't become a commissioned officer at that time. So it was just like that. Oh, what do I do? And then, joined up. But I think the academia piece is a thing I would like to do more of, because I quite like academia. I quite like reading, obviously, by all that bump on the shelves behind.
You're probably going to need a bigger bookshelf if you're going to.
I'm going to need a bigger. I'm going to need a bigger study. I'm going to need a much bigger study. But yeah, so I think it would either be law or it would be academia. I think they're the two areas I think I'd probably sit. I can waffle on, for goodness, so I'd imagine academia is probably a good fit.
Yeah, this was only meant to be a 5-minute interview. But no, yeah, I was going to follow a path like that as well. I wanted to study law, and then obviously didn't, and then went into the military like yourself. So, Glenn, it's been super great to have you on. Thanks so much for your insight and your advice to everyone else in the industry. Hopefully we touch base soon. Yeah,
no, sounds good. Thank you very much for your time, and everybody keep safe and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Glenn. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers now.
Bye.